Oh yeah, my son's joining me.
Okay, that's great. That's awesome. All right, let me just get the screen shared.
He's not looking at us, Keith. Come on.
And then it's open. That's awesome. Um, okay, so today I'm going to talk about prepping for your run. But before we get started, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Brian. I'm a personal trainer at GW. I'm also, to give you a little background, I'm a first year physical therapy student at GW in the program. And I'm also in undergrad, I studied athletic training, so I am a certified athletic trainer as well. So my movement science background is fairly robust. So just to give you a little background on me,
Right.
um, some objectives for today. So by the end of this session, you'll recognize the musculature that's active while running, identify proper warm-up activities to optimize running performance, and understand the importance of preparing your body for a run. So we'll get into all of that. So the active musculature. So really, you can make an argument that the entire body is active while you're running, but to get into it more specifically and to go region by region, if you start at the hips, um, when you talk about the hips, so the different muscles that are active, so I'm going to talk directionally. So in the back side of the hips and the side, all the glute muscles are active. So the ones that can extend your hip and the ones that can, it's called abducting when you kick your leg out to the side. The muscles in the back, the hamstrings, the adductor muscles on the inside are the groin muscles, and the flexors in the front. So those are active pretty consistently throughout running, not only to get your thigh and your leg to move as a whole, but also some of the glute muscles are there for more of a stabilization purpose and for control of your legs while you run so that you're able to basically control your legs the way you want to and control your stride length and control your speed. At your knees, the quadriceps and the hamstrings are active, so the front and the back, as well as some other smaller stabilizing muscles around the knees. And then in the lower leg and ankle, the calf muscles, the ones on the back, so the gastroc and the soleus are active the entire time, as well as pretibials. What I mean by that is the muscles on the front of your shin, as well as some stabilizing muscles on the inside and outside of your ankles. Um, and so stabilization here is a really large part of what the active musculature is there to do. And so the main aspects of stabilization is at the hips, knees, and ankles, as well as the spine, which I'll talk about on the next slide. But stabilization is a huge portion of active musculature that is not often not recognized and is actually extremely important for making sure that you can have a safe run and also that your body mechanics are strong and proper so that you don't end up getting any further injuries and that your performance is really optimized. And let's go to the next one. So the trunk musculature. So really your whole core is engaged here, and your core, I'm referring to everything from your shoulders all the way down to your mid thigh, basically. And so some of the important muscles here are the transverse abdominis, which is the most deep muscle of the core, and it's around your lumbar spine, so your low back. And basically what that does is it stabilizes your core and your trunk and your spine so that you're able to have distal mobility. So proximal stability for distal mobility so that you're able to effectively move your legs, your hips, and your knees without really affecting too much your pelvis or your low back stability, as well as the rest of your spine. But it really gives you the stability that allows you to then move. Then you have the internal and external obliques, as well as the rectus abdominis, so the typical thought of six-pack muscles. Those muscles help to not only with forced expiration while you're exercising, but those also have a similar role to the transverse abdominis in keeping your spine and your body stable during the run. Your arms, so it's primarily the shoulder musculature that is active. So there's some muscles around your shoulder blades that will be active that will basically work to keep the shoulder blades retracted or pulled back the whole time so that you are not rounding your shoulders too much and getting into a rounded posture. That helps keep safe a lot of the nervous structures that run through your arms as well as your neck. And it helps keep a proper tall posture while you're running. But the shoulder musculature, it's not like you're really putting much of a load through them like you are through the lower extremities. So it's important to focus on shoulder musculature, but it's not really considered primarily active during running. And additionally, in your neck, there are stabilizing muscles that have to act to make sure that you can maintain an upright posture. So basically, they act to make sure that you can maintain almost a chin tuck position, as opposed to letting your head come too far forward like this in a protracted position, like most people do while they're sitting all day, or sitting at their desks, or really having during the sitting time of the day when you're looking at your phone or your computer or anything like that. So the neck stabilizers are active to make sure that you can maintain a good posture while you run. And so how to warm up. So some of the main components that you want to focus on, the first one is raising your heart rate. And so the reason why that's important is because anytime before you exercise, you want to make sure, and while you start to exercise, you have to make sure that you're delivering blood to the working tissues so that you can get enough oxygen and nutrients to those tissues so that you can end up creating the energy and using the energy necessary in order to generate the force and maintain any sort of activity. It also helps to prepare yourself metabolically. So like I was saying, in order to use the energy molecules in your body without getting too specific into the science behind it, you have to make sure that your body is prepared and is in an aerobic in an aerobic capacity. Excuse me. So you want to be able to appropriately bring oxygen into the body, transfer that oxygen from the blood to the working muscles, and make sure that you can then use that oxygen in the muscles to use the energy that you have stored in the muscles. So it really gets everything going. It's kind of like starting a car and letting the car warm up for a little bit, let the oil move around, and get everything ready to go so that when you then go on the highway, it's not like you're starting a cold engine on the highway. You have everything warmed up, things are nice and oiled up and ready to go. You want to heat up your muscles, ligaments, joint capsules, and other soft tissue. And so what I literally mean by heat up is you want to bring warmth to those tissues, because by doing that, by warming up the connective tissues, you promote pliability in those tissues and elasticity. So a cold muscle is just like a cold rubber band would be, for example, is not as stretchy, and if you pull it too far, it's going to snap. And so muscles and ligaments are kind of the same way, more so muscles and tendons, but ligaments also gain some sort of pliability and ability to kind of return to their original length when they're warmed up. And so the tissues, like your muscles, tendons, and also different fascias, which are on, so a common injury is plantar fasciitis, so that refers to the tissue on the bottom of the foot, the plantar surface of the foot. Warming up tissues like that promotes pliability and elasticity so that when you apply these loads and forces through the tissues, they can respond appropriately. They can transform and adapt to the load that you're putting on them. They can stretch and also contract so that as you go through your activity, you're not overloading the tissues and promoting any sort of risk of strain or sprain of a muscle or ligament. And you want to activate protective muscles. So I kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, a couple of slides ago, talking about the spine, hips, knees, and ankles, as well as the neck, really. So part of the spine. But what you want to, when I say activate protective muscles, I'll give you an example of not activating the appropriate muscle. So some of the muscles at the hips that I spoke about before, the gluteal muscles that control your hips, if one of those muscles is called the gluteus medius, and it's specifically on the side of your hips, and it controls the alignment of your pelvis while you're running and while you're in single limb stance. So if that muscle is weak, if you look at this picture, if you look at this individual's right hip, there's a muscle on the outside of her right hip that's controlling really the left side of her pelvis. So by contracting that muscle, it keeps the pelvis level. If, for instance, she had a weak muscle, then the left side of her pelvis would drop down and the alignment of her pelvis would be off while she runs. So then as she alternates from right foot to left foot, her pelvis would do a balancing act. So if this is her pelvis, it's going to be going like this the entire time while she's running. If that's happening, that in and of itself may or may not be painful or uncomfortable for a person. Usually isn't, but there's usually other side effects that happen. So um, if that muscle is not strong, then maybe it doesn't allow the thigh bone to stay perfectly straight up and down. And as it gets toward closer into the knee, it allows the knee to bend in a little bit. And then that creates issues at the knee, which can then create issues at the ankle. And if your hips aren't perfectly aligned, or I shouldn't say perfectly, if they're not aligned in a functional, painless fashion, that can also create issues at the lumbar spine and then all the way up through the spine. So really activating protective muscles and keeping them strong helps to protect not only the joint that they cross, but also joints above and joints below. So that's just one example, but there are muscles like this throughout the body, especially the ones that you are loading while running or doing any sort of activities like that. So some examples of warm-up activities. So these are common ones. They don't take very long, and they're good to just do a couple of sets of before you start a run. So you don't really want to fatigue the muscles, but you just want to activate them. So doing 2 sets of 10 or something like that is a great way to get the muscles activated without fatiguing them. You're waking up the neural connection. So you're reminding the brain how to activate that muscle, not like you ever forgot, but you getting that activation ready and woken up so that when you then go to run, that connection is ready to go, and you're not only is the muscle warm and ready to go and have blood and oxygen ready to work, but there's also the nerve connection from the brain to the muscle is alive and ready to go. So the first example is a single leg step down. And so you can see that in the top left picture. That individual is standing on, it looks like a bench, but you can stand on just a regular stair or a curb. And the way you want to do it is make sure that your pelvis stays aligned the whole time. And you want to bend one knee down and lean, keep the other leg straight. And you can either touch your toes or your heel to the ground. Obviously, if you point the toes down, it's a decreased distance that you have to travel. If you do the heel, it's a little bit further. But the idea here is you want to activate the glute muscles, the quad muscles on the front of your thigh, and the hamstrings in the back of your thigh. Something else that's worth mentioning is that the hamstrings are muscles that cross both the hip joint and the knee joint. So the reason I bring that up is because they are active throughout the entire stride of running, whether they're acting at the hip or at the knee. So it's really important to keep these muscles strong and activated because they do really play a very large role in running in terms of stabilization and force production. So it's good to keep these muscles nice and healthy. So the single leg step down, as you can see, and then the next one, which is the top right picture, is a side step in a squat position with a band. And so all you want to do, you can put one of those stretchy TheraBands. You can either put it around your knees or your calves or all the way down to your ankles, really whatever most comfortable for you. And what you want to do is get down into a squat position. It doesn't have to be the deepest squat, but the deeper you go, the more activation and the harder it gets. And then the idea is you want to stay in this position, and then without standing up, you want to take a side step to the left and to the right, and you want to alternate the steps that you're taking. And the idea is that you don't want your knees to bend in. If the knees bend in, then you're not properly activating the hip muscles that keep the thighs straight. So you want to put an emphasis, and the band will definitely give you a solid reminder to contract those muscles, but you want to make sure that the hip muscles are activated in a way that allows your thighs to stay straight or a little bit pointed out. And so this is another great activity that you can do prior to running that activates those same glutes, quads, and hamstrings. The next one is somewhat pictured in the bottom left image, and they're explosive calf raises. So, these are good to do single leg, so one leg at a time, just because if you do, and this really goes for any sort of activity that you're doing through 2 limbs, if one calf is significantly stronger than the other, then you'll compensate for the weaker one with the stronger one. So in order to make sure that each segment is properly warmed up and is properly cared for, it's good to do one at a time. And so the explosive part of this, what I mean by that is, so when you jog, regardless of the speed that you jog at, the type of contraction that you get at the calf is pretty quick. you're only on that foot for a very short amount of time. You're very quickly going through. You get to initial contact. You're getting your loading response very quickly. You're in a stance phase, and then you very quickly push off, and your limb is back into a swing phase. So the calf actually works very quickly during running and jogging, really regardless of speed. And obviously, it acts even quicker during sprinting, and the contractions are more explosive then. But the way to warm this up properly and to make sure that you are mimicking the same action is to do it explosively. So if you stand at the base of, well, the way I do it is if you stand at the base of a staircase and you pick up so if you're doing it for the left leg, you bend the right leg up. So you flex your hip and flex your knee, and then lean forward and step up maybe 1 or 2 steps. Let that right foot fall onto the step, and then as quickly as you can, rise up onto one toe on the left. And so you rise up onto your toes, and then you very slowly load it back down, which is called eccentric work. And so that wakes up the muscle even more, and it puts even more stress on the muscle, which is just a great way to activate those muscles. The next one is marching with weights. So I'll explain that one. The bottom right image. So the position that the gentleman is in if you look on the left side of that picture, or really either side. So the difference between that image and the way that I'm suggesting is if you hold some pretty significantly heavy weights in your hands, if you have them, and then you hold a march position. So you stand on one foot and you bring your knee to your chest on the other side, and you squeeze all the muscles on the leg that you're standing on, and you squeeze your core and you stabilize everything that you have. And so what this does is it wakes up and activates the glutes on that side. You can really squeeze the glutes if you're extending your hip and straightening it and squeezing it as much as you can. Your hamstrings, the groin muscles, the hip flexors, the ankle stabilizers for sure, and the core musculature as well. If you tighten everything, engage your core, and really try to actively engage those muscles, this is a great way to activate all the muscles that you'll use during running, particularly because if you look at the way that he's standing, those are the extreme motions of running. If you're sprinting, you might hopefully be leaned a little bit more forward, but that's the extreme of the range of motion that you'll get. So to go into that extreme range of motion with some weights loads the muscles in a different way than you might use them while running, but it's a good way to wake them up and get them going. Another exercise that's not pictured here is you can just do jumping jacks or high knees or butt kicks or any combination of those or any activity like that. You can even do walking as well. The idea here is to get the heart racing and to get the heart going. And the reason is similar to what I had started to explain before with raising your heart rate and why that's important. So combinations of these exercises, doesn't have to be every single one of them. It could be a combination of some of them. The idea is just that you want to activate these muscles so that when you then go to run, the neural connection is alive and the blood is flowing through, so that you can, when you start to run, then you'll feel those muscles more quickly, which then gives you better body mechanics, which I'll get into in a little bit. What not to do prior to a run, and what a lot of people do, is hold a static stretch. And I'll explain why. So holding a static stretch prior to activity can actually potentially increase the risk of injury. It's not 100% correlation or causation, but those who hold stretches prior to activity can be more at risk for injuring the muscles, or really any part of any sort of the soft tissues that are utilized or loaded during running, which is it seems counterintuitive. You're trying to loosen up, you're trying to do the same thing as I'm describing with warming up. So it doesn't really sound like it makes sense. But part of the reason is because it reduces your maximal force production by stretching prior to activity. That's just what has been shown. The exact mechanism behind why and the physiology isn't fully understood yet, but there is more research going into it. It also interrupts optimal muscle length, and muscle length is important for maximal force production. So those go hand in hand. And also, if your muscle is really accustomed to being a certain length across your joints, and then you increase that length, and then you start to load it at a higher load than you typically would, it can be harmful. It's not necessarily harmful, because in some situations, stretching prior to activity to get to work into a new range is actually therapeutic, and it has a very good purpose. But in the sense of running, doing a thorough static stretching activity prior to running would not be suggested. That would be recommended for after your run, because those muscles are then warm, they're pliable. You just had blood running through them, and it's like a cheat sheet. If you have a warm muscle and then you stretch it, the stretch stays for a longer amount of time than if you were to stretch a cold muscle. So really, stretching is really more optimal to do after your run. And so why is this important? So I've kind of alluded to it the whole time, but to get more specific, so if you don't do it and you have cold muscles and ligaments and connective tissues and joint capsules and all these different tissues that are throughout your lower extremities and your spine, it can lead to overuse injuries or acute injuries like strains or sprains. So the kinds of overuse injuries that you might lead to, that you might have heard of in the past, could be like runner's knee or patellar tendonitis. And so that's an irritation in the front of your knee that can happen if it's just an overuse injury from irritation of that tendon. And some of that irritation can potentially be mitigated if you warm up before. It's not none of this is if you do this, then for sure this will happen. But if you can reduce the amount of risk factors and reduce the factors that might contribute to injury, then that's always a good step to take in terms of just self-preservation and health promotion. Strains and sprains. So strains with a T specifically refers to muscles and tendons, and sprains with a P refers to ligaments and joint tissues and other sorts of soft connective tissues. And so those can happen when the muscles are cold, because I made the analogy before that a cold muscle is like a cold rubber band, a cold elastic band. And if a cold, very old elastic band, a rubber band, if you try to stretch it further and further, it's going to snap pretty quickly. But if it's warm, it's more elastic, it has more give to it, and it's more elastic, so it can return more easily to its original length. And so a cold muscle is not like that. Another thing that I had mentioned was improper body mechanics. So I started to get into the unstable pelvis due to gluteal weakness, and it's pictured to the right. So if my description was hard to follow before, which I understand it may have been, then the picture on the right should hopefully help to kind of illustrate it a little bit better. So that if we're looking from behind at the person's hips, so you see the right hip, you can see that gluteus medius muscle is contracting and acting in a way that the pelvis is stable. That's why the line is horizontal across the pelvis. Then if you look at the picture on the right, that muscle, the arrow is pointing to indicate that the muscle is not working, and because it's not holding the pelvis up, the left side drops. And so as this pelvis goes up and down, you get issues not only at the knees, obviously at the hips, then you get them at the knees, potentially the ankles, and potentially the spine as well. And so you can get pain really in any location because of that, but it can commonly present in the hips. And so to avoid this, you want to keep them strong. You can also get what's called a valgus moment at the knee because of glute or quadricep weakness or groin tightness. So a valgus moment at the knee is when your knees start to kind of buckle in and you look knock-kneed when you're running or when you're walking. And so weak quads on the inside or weak tight adductors or tight groins can pull your thigh bones. Instead of going straight down, instead of going down, they come in more. And so this can lead to loading of the lateral compartment, so the outside compartment of your knee joints, which can lead to pain, and pain makes you stop running. So keeping those muscles strong prevents that sort of pain. And also improper mechanics, so loading the foot in a way that improperly stresses the bone. So if your ankle stabilizers are not activated and you're not using them, they're not necessarily weak, but you're not really activating them while you run, then you might be loading your foot in a way that ends up giving you a stress fracture in one of the smaller bones on the inside of your foot. So kind of what would seem like a freak injury, but if you're not properly activating those muscles, and instead of instead of adapting and accepting the load in a way that your foot can handle, if you just kind of slap your foot down, or your foot hits kind of flat-footed, it can potentially lead to, along with some other things, it can potentially lead to stress fractures and unnecessary and undue stress, anywhere from the foot all the way up the kinematic chain, all the way up to your pelvis. And that's why so many people who start running and start increasing their volume too quickly do frequently get stress fractures, because you're increasing the load in a way that your body's not used to. And so not using your muscles properly can have the same effect. And so the ultimate consequences are overuse injuries. So stress reactions are just the predecessor to stress fractures. So you can just start to get pain somewhere, and you may not know, the pain that you get might be referred from another area. So you may have pain in your knee, and you're not really sure, and you're strengthening everything around your knee, but the problem is at your hip, and that your hip is even having a stress reaction, and the pain is referring all the way down to your knee. So really hard to tell with those types of injuries, and obviously best to avoid them. Tendinopathy just means any sort of pathology or abnormal condition that's occurring at your tendons, which are the tissues that connect your muscles to your bones. And so one of the examples that I mentioned was patellar tendinitis. So right in the front of your knee, the tendon that connects your quad muscle on the front of your thigh to your shin, that tendon can get irritated along with many other tendons and muscles. So you can get it in the hamstrings, you can get it in the hip muscles, the gluteal muscles, and you can also get it even in the ankle at the Achilles tendon, which is at the back where your calf inserts into your heel bone. I put osteoarthritis there with a question mark because running at high loads does not by itself, with proper mechanics, predispose you to early arthritis or early progression of arthritis if you already have it. That is not proven. What is potentially suggested and may have a causative effect is if you run with improper body mechanics and you load your tissues and your bones in non-physiological ways that alter the typical mechanics of your body and put stresses through those tissues that are not physiological and are not appropriate, that can potentially increase your risk of osteoarthritis or can potentially progress the condition. So there's a lot of mays and maybe and it might, but that's at the current moment, that's the best information and evidence that exists. So some people get afraid that, people who run half marathons are going to get arthritis in their knees one day. Some of them might, but many of them may not, because it affects everybody differently. Their mechanics may work for them. They may have proper mechanics, but running in and of itself will not cause osteoarthritis necessarily. All right, and so I'll go ahead and ask a couple of questions. So you can unmute yourself if you'd like. Which of the following body segments would be considered active during running activities? The knees, the trunk, the neck, or all of the above?
All of them?
Yep, exactly. So the one thing I wanted to emphasize here is that the trunk and the neck, even though they're not moving too much like the knees and the hips are, but they are stabilizing, and so they are considered active. So good. And the next one, which is not an important primary reason to activate the appropriate muscles before running: ensure proper mechanics, build muscle strength, protect the joints being loaded, or prevent acute or overuse injuries.
Build muscle strength.
Yeah, exactly. So, so building muscle strength is, and this one's kind of tricky because I alluded to the strength of the muscles, but the reason I put that in there is because obviously you do want to build muscle strength in these tissues, especially the ones at the hips and the knees and the ankles. So you definitely want to take time to strengthen those muscles. But the idea of the warm up is to get the blood flowing, get the oxygen, and wake up the neural connection. So that was the reason why I wanted to make that differentiation. And that is all I have. Do you have any questions from anything that I said or anything that I didn't mention that you want to hear about?
Not from anything you said. I did have a question though.
Yeah, go shoot.
And you just said no. Yeah, I run, and I was coming back from, I had broken my foot, nothing to do with running. And when I was coming back, I noticed that my knee bothers me not when I'm running, but if I bend it back a lot, just one of my knees, like doing child's pose.
Okay.
So that kind of thing. So like when it's bent way back, child's pose or quad stretch, it'll hurt a little bit kind of in the front bottom
Okay.
of the knee. What might that be?
So that's kind of like, and you said you feel the pain in the front.
Yeah, a little bit like under the kneecap, but it doesn't bother me at all. Just walking, running, doing anything. It's only when I have that deep pulling back.
Okay, yeah. So sometimes, so the kneecap is like built into the quad and the patellar tendon, and so when you bend your knee all the way back, it basically like pulls the kneecap into the thigh bone, and like the knee complex overall, and so that can be causing some pain there. And so the reason behind it could be, do you usually do like resistance and strengthening exercises, or are you primarily do you primarily stick to running?
Primarily stick to running. I tried during the workday every once in a while to do some quads and lunges, and it bothers me a little bit doing those.
Okay.
But that's all.
Um, so yeah, so there can be a couple of reasons, a couple of things that could be contributing to it. Usually the two most without like doing any further testing, the two most common things that I have seen are quad weakness and hip weakness. So the quad weakness, specifically, the quad muscles that are on the inside of your knee more so, that are more so involved in the last part of extension. So this last part, as opposed to like bending it all the way, just that last part. If those are weak, then it can alter the tracking of your kneecap, so that when you bend your knee all the way, then your kneecap doesn't track the right way, and it could squeeze in the wrong spot and cause pain. So one thing could be weakness there, and the other thing, the weakness in the hip muscles. If you're so the glute muscles that I was talking about before, if those ones are not strong enough, and it allows your thighs, instead of going straight down, to go more in like this, it can have the same effect on your kneecap and make it not track the right way, not track up and down. It can kind of pull a little bit to the side. So I would suggest, I think if you do you have one of those stretchy TheraBands at home?
Yeah, I think somewhere.
So if you have one of those are awesome. If you just put that around your knees, and if you just get into a squat position and just take side steps out, and
Yeah.
make sure to like really squeeze the glute muscles on the side. Those are the ones that are like more important for the thing that you're talking about. Those are huge. And then if you also you can do like wall squats. You can just back up against a wall, and if that's too easy for you, then you can pick up one leg and do single leg wall squats. And that tends to like really blast the quads and the glute muscles. So those are big. And if you want to do another quad exercise, I'm trying to think of, because I'm imagining right now you probably don't have access to like a gym or a facility like that.
No.
Yeah. So I would one exercise you can do for the quads. If you kneel on the ground, you could use like a pillow, so it's like softer. But if you kneel down and you lean back, and then you use your quads to kick into the ground to bring your body back up, it takes a little playing around to really feel it in your quads. But if you do that, that really does strengthen them a lot. And so adding that to the lunges are great that you do, and the squats are awesome. So if you can keep doing all those exercises, my guess is that the pain would start to go away. But it's super common in runners to have pain like right behind the kneecap.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, and then always, do you typically stretch?
After I'm done, I do. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. So just, always keep up with that, and that's awesome.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Do you have any other questions?
I don't think so. Keith, did you have any questions? I think we're good. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, no problem. I hope you got something out of it. Have a great day.
All right. Thanks a lot.
No problem. Bye.